Today's focus: why is the IMF suddenly going after Ghana for trying to strengthen its own currency? No headlines, no outrage, no punishment. In fact, the IMF itself has publicly stated that the U.S. can never really owe it money because all debts are in U.S. dollars.
The first question is a very important question. What makes African and third world debt different from the American debt? Number one, America is never going to pay its debts. It doesn't have to. Its debts are in its own currency. We can simply print it. The African debt is not in its currency. The African debt is in U.S. dollars. Africa has to earn the U.S. dollars, and the only way it can earn the U.S. dollars is not to be assassinated for growing its own food and becoming independent and doing something that the United States does not like. The principle underlying the foundation of the World Bank, the International Bank for IBRD, research, the World Bank, is that no country should grow its own food. Africa and the third world should only grow export crops. To export, in order to have an oversupply of cocoa and other tropical raw materials, to keep down the price, they must buy their grain from the United States or Europe, so that if they do something that we don't like, we can do what America tried to do to China in the 60s. We can sanction them. We can say, we're going to starve you. We're going to not export any grain to you. So owing their foreign debt in dollars means that they have to somehow sell something that the United States wants, not what they want. I think the most evil organizations in the world today are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And my book, Super Imperialism, that I wrote in 1972.
And America can always print.
IMF, World Bank, all other institutions, they make African countries jump through hoops. Loans will never be able to pay. The US, when they borrow money, they're getting it in 1.5, 1.9 interest rate. Africans, when they get the same amount of money, they're paying 9, 10%. The people who don't need a break, they get a break. The ones who need a break, they don't get a break. The sheer survival of the World Bank, IMF, is based on the fact that African countries and many other developing countries do not succeed. Their success is based on our failure. That has to change. And guess who can make that change? We, the children of Africa, we, the Africans, are the ones who have to say, we know your game now. Enough is enough. We're not playing it anymore. And this is where the diaspora come in.
Is this really about economic discipline, or is it about keeping Ghana and Africa under control? Let's get into it. The International Monetary Fund has recently raised concerns that the Ghanaian government is manipulating the Ghanaian cedi by injecting large amounts of foreign exchange into the market. In simple terms, Ghana is allegedly spending dollars to boost the value of the cedi, ensuring that it appears strong on the global market.
IMF, World Bank, all other institutions, they make African countries jump through hoops. Loans will never be able to pay. The US, when they borrow money, they're getting it in 1.5, 1.9 interest rate. Africans, when they get the same amount of money, they're paying 9, 10%. The people who don't need a break, they get a break. The ones who need a break, they don't get a break. The sheer survival of the World Bank, IMF, is based on the fact that African countries and many other developing countries do not succeed. Their success is based on our failure. That has to change. And guess who can make that change? We, the children of Africa, we, the Africans, are the ones who have to say, we know your game now. Enough is enough. We're not playing it anymore. And this is where the diaspora...
National forces and international forces that affect their lives. Amongst the international forces, you find that there are bodies like the International Monetary Fund, which really impose themselves on our governments. For instance, they have asked in Zimbabwe that our present government should reduce food subsidies. It should do away with public spending, which means it should cut down on education and health. It should also devalue the currency. It should also freeze the wages of the workers. And it is exactly these things that the government is trying to raise recently they have raised the minimum wage of workers, up to something like 143 Zimbabwean dollars for the workers. And ever since the independence of Zimbabwe, if there is anything that the government has done for the people for now, it is bringing health facilities, bringing educational facilities, that is building schools, preschool facilities in the rural areas in particular, because most of Zimbabwe is rural and the population there is more than 80%. So that, in other words, the IMF is saying to Zimbabwean government, do not do anything good for your people. So would we not say that that is a form of aid that we really are rejecting, so that these loans, when they are given by the IMF and the World Bank, they are not to support the livelihood of our people, and especially the poorer classes, that is the peasants and the workers. But in fact, they are dominating over and above our governments. So we find our governments, even when they try a lot to improve the situation for the people, it is difficult. So we as researchers, we bring this kind of knowledge to our pastors, we bring this kind of knowledge to our women and youth so that they understand how the world functions and how it affects our situation.
If Ghana succeeds in strengthening the Cedi through domestic efforts, it could set a dangerous precedent for the IMF and the West, because it sends a clear message to other African countries: you don't need IMF loans to survive. And that message, more than any currency movement, might be what truly worries the global financial elite. Could it be that the fear isn't about Ghana manipulating its currency, but about Ghana breaking free? Some Ghanaians themselves have raised concerns about the government's approach. They argue that injecting large sums into the forex market to boost the Cedi is not a sustainable economic strategy.
Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that we are experiencing the appreciation of the Cedi is fiscal policy. We admit that it contributes. But we have been reminding this government that much of the impact is due to government of Bank of Ghana direct intervention in the market, which is antithetical to the free liberal market we are operating. When you inject Ghanaian Cedi, when you inject dollar into the Ghanaian Cedi, it creates a false sense that investors will think that your Cedi is doing well. In actual case, it is not doing well. And the IMF has actually come to the country and they have mentioned that the Bank of Ghana must stop. And this house must encourage the Bank of Ghana to stop the measures of intervening and injecting hard currency into the economy. Mr. Speaker, to GDP, what has the government? The government has not paid any loan except those who have so agreed to pay. Government has actually contracted more loan, but debt to GDP is declining. Why? Because of the painful decision of Nana Addo Dankwa government to go for the debt restructuring and to go for the IMF support program. Now they are taking the credit. Today, they are taking the credit and they are telling that their debt to GDP is 54%. But they forgot to tell the House what has accounted for the reduction in the debt to GDP. The government has not done anything about the debt situation. Absolutely nothing. Yet the debt to GDP has moved to 54. He needed to tell this House that it is decreasing because the government painfully took the debt restructuring program. The government painfully went to the IMF for a for a fund program, and the government has actually been doing that because the government is gaining this momentum because of the intervention of Nana Akufo. Mr. Speaker.
According to these critics, a strong currency should reflect real economic productivity, manufacturing, exporting, innovatory dollar injections. They ask a valid question. If the average Ghanaian on the street still struggles to afford food, fuel, or rent, then what exactly does a strong Cedi achieve? Is it only about optics, about looking good on paper while the economy on the ground remains in crisis? This debate opens the floor to a larger question.
So we've seen the IMF's, statement after they approved some $367 million for Ghana. They're talking about how the Bank of Ghana should reduce its interventions in the forex market. First of all, help us understand what's wrong with the Bank of Ghana interfering in the forex market. After all, we have always said that, Bank of Ghana's work that it does is aimed at is inflation targeting. Everything it does seeks to reduce inflation when it comes to even monetary policy rate. So if we say we have, imported inflation, should they be working on the exchange rates?
Should African governments focus on controlling currency figures or on building real economic strength that translates into the lives of ordinary people? We invite you to answer in the comment section. Do you believe currency manipulation helps or harms long-term development? Now let's step back and look at the global stage. The same IMF that is condemning Ghana's Cedi injections rarely questions similar actions in Western nations. Take the United States, for example. When America faces an economic crisis, it prints more money, massive amounts. This isn't considered manipulation. It's called stimulus, dollars to pay. So why then does the same IMF insist that African countries repay loans in US dollars, a currency they do not print? And why does it penalize them for any attempt to gain even a fraction of the control that the US and Europe exercise daily? This is not just about Ghana. It's about a financial world order that seems designed to keep Africa dependent, submissive, and extractable. Which brings us to a disturbing pattern. When African countries take IMF loans and eventually default, they often end up surrendering natural resources to pay off the debt. Oil, gold, bauxite, lithium, farmland, auctioned off to international corporations and foreign governments. Could it be that debt is just a tool, a sophisticated mechanism to legally extract Africa's wealth without firing a single shot? If the Ghanaian Cedi performs well without IMF support, it could ruin the narrative that Africa always needs help. It challenges the power of the lender. And that could explain why institutions like the IMF are always deeply involved in African economic policy, even more than they are in other developing regions. So here's a bigger question. Why is the IMF always interested in Africa? Why does every African economic policy require external validation? Why must African currencies float under Western observation, but Western currencies float freely without consequences? And when African nations succeed on their own terms, why does it often lead to sudden scrutiny or pressure? Africa's experience with the IMF is a long and painful one. Structural adjustment programs have crippled public services. Subsidy removals have sparked protests. Currency devaluations have led to inflation and social unrest. And yet, the cycle continues. Because in this system, the only acceptable African government is one that borrows, obeys, and complies. Ghana's attempt to defend its currency could be seen as economic resistance, a country daring to define its own monetary policy without waiting for Western approval. So the question we leave you with today is this: is the IMF afraid of a financially independent Africa? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Do so respectfully, and let's have a real conversation about power, policy, and Africa's future. We'll be back soon with more in-depth, fearless analysis. But until then, ask questions, stay informed, and never settle for the surface story.